Excellent. Hello, everyone. I think I can see. I'm just allowing people through into our room. So just wait while everyone sort of connects. There's a few more from the waiting room. Yep, excellent. I can see a few people there now. All right, so we're just going to get underway. And so I'll just introduce myself and to let everyone know that this session is being recorded tonight so that we can share it with participants who haven't been able to join us and hope to be here. So welcome to our podcast. Oh, I'm going to call it a podcast, but it's kind of like a recording that we're doing tonight and sharing it with live attendees. My name is Dr. Deepa Mahananda, and I'm one of the co-directors of Sydney Low Carb Specialists, and I'm pretty happy that we can have this platform tonight to share some information with our community. Before we begin, I've just got a couple of housekeeping points. As I mentioned, the session is being recorded. We'll send the recording out afterwards to our registered attendees. And if you're comfortable too, we'd love for you to turn your camera on. It's always nicer for our speakers to know who they're communicating with and talking to. And please keep yourselves on mute during the course of the presentations. That would be greatly appreciated. If you've got questions during the talks, please pop them into the chat box as they come to your mind. We will have plenty of time at the very end of the three presentations tonight as then we can go through questions as they've come up. And tonight you'll hear from three different health professionals who each bring a very different perspective to women's health. So there's the medical side, nutritional changes that we can make, and also how to move from the knowing to the doing gap, which our health coach is going to go through as well. So James, I might ask you to share your screen while I introduce you. Our first speaker is Dr. James Brown. He's a specialist gynecologist with an expertise in menopause, fertility, and reproductive hormone health. And he also cares for women with conditions including PMDD, PMOS, and heavy menstrual bleeding. James is also the clinical co-lead of the Southwest Sydney Specialist Menopause Service and works at a organisation called the Women's Health and Research Institute of Australia, which is in Sydney. So I'd like to please welcome James. You can take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Deepa. My name's James, guys. Thanks for attending. The talk today is just sort of a top line overview of all the things that make fertility what it is, going through the kind of ingredients and lifestyle aspects that are obviously particularly relevant to the people who go through Sydney Low Carb. So hopefully this will be nice and approachable, and there's obviously plenty of time for question afterwards if you have any worries or if anything went too fast. So, when we talk about infertility or subfertility, we really are talking about quite a few people. Mostly, if people conceive, they 85% of them, if they try on a monthly basis, and we'll talk about strategy shortly, will conceive after 12 months. So, what this means is that about 15% of people after that will still be challenged by infertility. Now, you extrapolate that over the course of someone's life, and it ends up being around 1 in 6 couples. This obviously doesn't make it any easier just because it's common, but it does help to know that it's a frontier that has been crossed before and that we have a lot of options for investigation and treatment. The challenge we have, though, is that fertility is a pretty hot topic, and there seems to be every month either some fumble or some new piece of research that makes fertility even more complicated than it already is. But in reality, it's actually fairly simple. The most important thing, and we have to kind of talk about this, is unfortunately the age of the mother or whoever's providing the eggs really is the biggest contributor to the success rate of pregnancy. This little graph here, as you'll see, obviously it slides down, but you'll see that there's just a bit by bit diminishment on a monthly percentage basis, depending on people's age. So it starts in your 20s at around sort of 22 to 25%, and then by the time people enter their 30s, we're looking at around 17 to 15%. What's most important is that I think historically people have started to worry around that kind of 34 to 35-year mark, but really that decline is still quite gradual. But if you draw your attention to around 38, where those purple bars begin, that's when the curve starts to invert. and there's a bit more of an acceleration of loss in those monthly chances. So if you want to do anything for your fertility, it's often thinking, planning, and doing a little bit sooner than you'd expect because those chances do matter. These multiply across months on months on months. So they do end up mattering. But we just need to put that out there that age matters the most. The other important thing, though, is that in addition, you can't really change your age, you can't change the clock, but you can certainly change the body that your eggs are in. And we'll talk about sperm as well. And it's really clear that body weight and metabolic health matter a lot. And that means both being underweight as well as having excess weight can disrupt the production of eggs or the availability of eggs every month, as well as the hormonal balance, which is the environment in which a pregnancy would develop. It's important to note that lifestyle habits themselves directly affect reproductive hormones. So whether you're smoking, excessive alcohol, poor sleep, and especially chronic stress can all interfere with those usual hormonal signals that are needed for regular ovulation and healthy sperm production. And what that means is that when people are motivated and before you have kids in your life, you have this ideal window of time to really try and buckle down and do all the things that may benefit your chances and use that as kind of a catalyst for change. Nutrition itself, given that that's the environment where all this reproductive health occurs, really supports those building blocks for fertility. And so if you talk about a diet rich in whole foods, healthy fats, folate, and antioxidants, we know that this helps support egg and sperm quality. And of course, avoiding excessive processed food and sugar intake, of course, will help as well. But it's important to remember that we're really talking about 4.5 ingredients when it comes to fertility. It can seem really complicated, lots of science, but really it comes down to 4 ingredients to making a baby. First, and what we'll talk about a lot today, is that pesky old egg. That's the rate limiting step that we have. Every month when someone produces an egg, that's their chance of pregnancy, 1, with that percentage per age usually. So best case scenario, most people have 12 chances per year. But if you're not ovulating regularly due to health concerns, those chances go down. So some people might only be having 4 periods a year. We'll talk about that too. And that means they've only got 4 chances a year, making things a lot harder. The other important part, and what we're talking about a lot more lately, is sperm, which we've had a fairly crude understanding of until more recently, where we really only cared about that was plenty and that it seemed okay and that was good enough. But now there's more nuance to that evaluation. Equally, we want to talk about the tubes and the uterus itself. And so the uterus as a shape, we want the shape to be nice and uniform, no big lumps or bumps. And of course, we want those tubes to be open and patent for the egg and the sperm to travel. But what we don't really account for sometimes is the quality of the lining of the uterus itself, which is intrinsically related to the hormones of the cycle itself and can be really important because, it's all well and good to plant a plant, but the soil's got to be good too. And the other element which we won't cover today is endometriosis, which counts for the half that we're talking about. So when someone comes in and wants to start talking about their fertility, really where we start with, sadly, is with the female partner and talk a lot about their periods. And that's because you can tell a lot about someone's fertility history based on what their periods are doing. It's funny that periods act as this kind of canary in a coal mine of someone's female reproductive health. And the more normal or more consistent they are, the more reassured we can be. And this is because that menstrual health, that patterns and the symptoms can give us some critical information around the egg, meaning its availability, as well as the lining, if we've got a nice uniform development of a lining, as well as the implantation. It also gives us some suspicions around potentially endometriosis, which is an important consideration. And so the reason why, and we're going to talk about next, a consistent, uncomplicated period pattern is important for natural conception. And that means, and I want to break it down into 3 big categories. So the availability, the planning, and the problems. So availability is the biggest one we want to talk about. Regular cycles usually mean regular ovulation. So if your period comes around the same time of month, say 24, 28, 35 days, it's a good sign that the body is releasing an egg regularly, which gives you the best chance to conceive in that cycle. Remember, 1 egg means 1 chance with the percentage based on your age. So if you get 12 tickets in the lottery, that's a lot better than someone out there who's only getting 8 tickets to the lottery, which means you might have 20% overall less chance that year. The other thing is that if your periods are irregular, even if the egg's available, it makes it really hard to time trying. As you might be aware, if you're someone who's already looked into this, is that it's really specific that people track their cycle and they work out when exactly they're ovulating so that they can really plan intercourse around that time. The problem we have is that the clue that you ovulated is the period that eventually comes. Now, you can't go back in time in 2 weeks. You can't go back in time 2 weeks and then, have sex then. You really have to plan ahead. And so tracking, it makes it really hard when they're unpredictable. So not only do you have less tickets in the lottery, it's really hard to make use of those because it's really hard to plan around unpredictability versus predictability. And the other thing is that if someone has very heavy, painful, or long periods, this can point to underlying issues. So we talked about endometriosis, fibroids, or now what we call PMOS or PCOS, often show up in these period patterns, and they give us a really big clue as to what we can treat underlying. As we mentioned before, nutrition, diet, and general, metabolic health are really important to regulating that reproductive cycle. Here's the cycle itself here. This is just to give you a bit of an overview, but day one starts over on the left there, and then the end ends at the 28 days there. As you can see, in the middle of there's all these hormones that are really coordinating in communication. So for example, that green line that goes up in a big hump, that's your estrogen, and that actually communicates with the brain to release that purple line, which is the luteinizing hormone, which is responsible for releasing an egg. This is the part that's often missing in people who have PMOS or PCOS. And so if your metabolic health is messing with the hormones and we're causing an imbalance, all of these coordinated signals may break down, and that's what would lead to both the irregularity of cycle, but also an uncoordinated lining inside the uterus. And that's why we care so much. Talking about the lining, why does that matter? So if you have irregular ovulation, this often means irregular progesterone. So if we go back a slide, you'll see here, if you follow the blue line, that progesterone rises in the back half of the cycle. The important thing to know is that progesterone is produced by the releasing of an egg. And progesterone is really important. It sustains a pregnancy as it's starting, hence why it's called progesterone, so promoting gestation hormone. And so it's really important for making sure that the lining is stable and welcoming of the embryo. So if you have an irregular ovulation, then you don't get that usual progesterone rise, and the lining itself isn't as effective. The other trick that we would have is that if you're skipping cycles and you have something like PCOS or PMOS, what is happening is you're getting a thickening and a thickening and a thickening every month, but you're not getting the period to release that thickening. And so as you can imagine, if you're just laying coats of paint one over the other and it stagnates, we also have some suspicions that would have an impact on implantation. So having a regular shedding cycle is just as important as that regular hormonal cycle as well. There's a lot of reasons people have an irregular cycle, and when you speak to your clinician, they'll talk you through this. But PCOS, PMOS is one of the most common causes. Then there's thyroid disorders, both underactive and overactive. Hyperprolactinemia, which is a hormone that comes from the brain and leads to irregular cycles. Perimenopause, and of course, significant weight changes or low body weight. This sends strange signals up to the brain, which then gets confused and really doesn't send down the regulated patterns that are required for a regular cycle. And the other thing we don't talk about enough is that we make fertility, investigation very stressful, when in reality, one of the biggest contributors to infertility is stress itself. And here we are all living on planet Earth, and we know that life is very stressful. And so it's really important to regulate your stress as best you can, because that's a natural signal evolutionarily for the body to not get pregnant, because it's a time of danger, obviously, and without space for gestation. Many of these, though, are reversible with prompt identification and lifestyle management. So if your periods are irregular and you're seeking pregnancy, the most important part is to see your GP. The causes can be investigated and treated, and often it's important to begin sustainable lifestyle modification. That's all the good things you should already be doing. Diet, exercise, supplementation, reducing bad habits, and really importantly, reducing stress, which is easier said than done. Another thing to think about is ovulation tracking. So if you don't have a regular cycle, or even if you do, there's these things called ovulation kits, and they test that luteinizing hormone that I showed you before. When it's positive, it's time, and you're able to time intercourse really appropriately. Some people may opt to track their ovulation through a fertility clinic, where often it's just bulk billed, so it doesn't cost you anything, and it just requires a few blood tests throughout the month, and you get some phone calls with the clinical team as well. In most cases, with people where we don't find any other problems, once ovulation is corrected, your chances are as good as everyone else's. So it's a really valuable thing, and it can avoid a lot of intervention. Now, we don't want to forget about sperm itself. And so it's important to note that semen quality itself is a window into general health. So, unlike eggs, which you're born with and they kind of age over time, sperm is different. It's constantly being produced and it turns over and dies, which takes about 2 to 3 months. So, really, their quality reflects what's been happening in the body recently, including diet, weight, sleep, stress, exposure to toxins, and excessive alcohol. But on the flip side, that means they're basically infinitely manageable because if those things are reversible, you can change them, and within 2 to 3 months, you'll see the results. The key measures that we look at that link to fertility chances are sperm count, the movement of the sperm, and the shape of them. And all of these, as you see on a semen analysis, affect the likelihood of the sperm reaching and fertilizing the egg. The more of these we have, the better we are. Now, it's important to note that despite there only being one egg, most semen deliveries will have about 15 million sperm. So there's a bit of reserve there. It's also important to note that poor semen quality can sometimes flag other broader health concerns, whether it's structural, whether it's metabolic. And so it's a bit of a window in current health, especially for guys who often don't seek healthcare otherwise. And this is why guidelines, which previously were very much focused on the woman, now very much recommend a semen analysis sooner rather than later if we're talking about infertility. And so that question where you've tried for 12 months and haven't gotten anywhere, we used to really, interrogate the lady dramatically and as an afterthought almost do the sperm count, but now it's front and center because it's not uncommon for people to have changes. Most of the time it's lifestyle management, just like what we've been speaking about. Weight management, smoking cessation, reducing alcohol intake, as well as avoiding excessive heat exposure, like having your laptop on your crotch. Dietary pattern really matters as well. So we're talking about antioxidants, omega-3 fatty acids, and lower in processed and trans fats, as well as some antioxidant supplementation and some small evidence as well. Exercise, stress reduction, it's all the same stuff over and over again, all the good stuff we should be doing anyway. And what if this doesn't work? So let's say you try all the lifestyle stuff, you do everything your best you can, you're ovulating regularly, all that sort of stuff. The general advice is that if you've been consistently trying with otherwise regular cycles and you're under 35, that's when you should see someone for help. Alternatively, if you're over 35, because of that graph that I showed you before, it's over 6 months of consistent trying. Now, if there's obvious issues like irregular periods or erectile dysfunction or a medical condition, you're going to want to ask for help sooner. And all you need to do is start by seeing your GP and going from there. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James. That was fantastic and a great overview to start us off tonight. I'm just going to, if you want to unmute Kate and start to do a screen share of your slides. So if there are any questions for James, please pop them in the chat box and we'll come back to them at the end when we've got time for the Q&A. So I'm just going to introduce Kate now. She's our accredited practicing dietitian at Sydney Low Carb Specialists. She's got a passion for helping people improve their metabolic health through practical and evidence-based nutrition strategies. And she supports women across all of the life stages, particularly with concerns that relate to PMOS, which formerly was called PCOS, insulin resistance, fertility, weight management, and peri or postmenopausal health concerns. And Kate's really passionate about helping patients make dietary changes and get that to be incorporated into their lifestyle and their routine, which is really important to long-term success. So I'll hand over to Kate.
Thank you, Deepa. That's fantastic. So basically going to do a bit of an overview of the foods that we should be eating, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say we probably need to be eating more, not less. This is what I see most of the time. So more is probably going to be your friend to make sure we are hitting all of those wonderful, important goals. But not just more in general, more of the types of foods that are going to be able to support our metabolic health as well as our nutrient density, making sure that we're hitting all those markers for your vitamins and your minerals, the healthy fats, and all the things that we've been talking about so far. So looking at the list I just popped up there, if you haven't seen it before, it's a pretty standard list that I give up. That generally tends to lead you somewhere around the ketogenic diet, which we can all do. if that's what we'd like to do, especially if we've got underlying health issues like insulin resistance, maybe that we're trying to get on top of. But otherwise, adding a few little extra bits and pieces on top of that list can get us up to a more liberal low carb approach. So there's lots of different ways to approach this. I do find most people end up eating some kind of reduced carbohydrate though, because by the time we get all the protein, healthy fats and veggies in, it doesn't leave a lot of room for a lot of excess carbohydrates anyway. So it does kind of naturally lead itself to this way of eating. So I will start with protein. Um, and for those of you who don't know, these are the kinds of foods that I'm mostly talking about when we're talking about protein. And you can see there that a lot of the animal-based proteins are significantly higher in protein than some of the plant-based proteins there, like the mixed nuts and the legumes. So, yep, they absolutely do contain the protein, but not as much. So you'd have to eat way more of those. And why I said you do need to eat more, a lot of women I'm seeing are probably eating a little bit too much of those things, and not enough of some of the other things. So it is a little bit about balance as well. So a lot of people think vitamins and minerals, and they think vegetables and fruits. So these slides are really just to highlight that our protein-rich foods really do have a lot of nutrient density in there as well. So I'm going to zoom through just to highlight some of the different ones there across the board. And if you are then eating a variety of these different proteins across the week, you are going to be hitting off so much of your micronutrition before a vegetable even touches your plate. So, really getting this part is important for balancing off um, your energy requirements, making you feel nice and full and satisfied, but also helping you hit your micronutrient targets. Another important thing to consider is the availability of the protein. So this is a super quick slide just to sort of show that our whey, milk, and animal-based proteins all have a DS score above 1, which is basically an indication of how well your body can digest those. Whereas the plant proteins, your soy, peas, tofu, they do contain protein, but they're sort of under the 1 consistently. So they're just not going to be as available for you to turn into muscles, which is what we want for healthy metabolism. And this is also just another little infographic sort of showing that if you've got 100 grams of sirloin steak, you're going to be getting 100% of your amino acids in that, pretty much except for cysteine at the top there. Whereas 400 grams of kidney beans, you're going to be missing the mark consistently across the board for about 4 times as many carbohydrates. So it is there, it's just not quite as there. And then how you decide to spread those throughout the day can also matter. So especially if we are looking about our weight management side of it, our insulin resistance side of it, getting 3 consistent meals with a sort of protein intake of about 30 grams is probably a wonderful place to start to make sure that we are getting our maximum protein synthesis for that really healthy muscle development and hormone regulation that comes with healthy metabolism. If we are having less than that per meal, we run the chance that it's not going to get into that muscle building pathway. It might end up in an energy pathway, which we potentially don't want, or we might overshoot, which nothing really bad happens, but why do this if we can do this instead? And this is a beautiful little picture down here. This is just some collagen, because unless we're eating lots of meat off the bone and lots of skins off the chicken and salmon, we're probably not getting enough collagen. And as we age, we don't make enough collagen anyway. So if we are going to be supplementing our whole foods protein, which is obviously my preference, we may as well be supplementing with something like a collagen so that we are still really optimizing that, protein shake that we might do for convenience in the morning or what have you as well. That I think is the really important one that I want to chat about after protein, because again, most of us are not eating enough of this as women. We've been told most of our lives that we need to avoid this. But even just the omega-3s, there's some really wonderful research showing about increased oxygen transport, improved mood, improved memory and cognition, and reduced inflammation. So fats in general are going to help your hormone profile, but overall getting a lovely balance of these healthy fats are going to help the overall metabolic health at the same time as some other added benefits. So, absolutely critical for hormone production and balance. And if you're not getting enough, your hormones are going to be out of balance. So, being in the lower carb makes it safe to really maximize that fat, which I think is a fabulous thing. But it also keeps your skin supple and your brain sharp and your mood stable. So, there's really no downside to this. It tastes good. Staying hydrated, very important as well. Some of us do this really well, others don't. But if you are lowering your carbohydrates, this becomes more important. If you're exercising, if you're in the sauna, if you're sweating for any other reasons, making sure you do have enough salt and magnesium and some of these other electrolytes. Very important to make sure you're staying hydrated overall. So nutrient deficiencies. Basically, this is a slide that I wanted to share. It is modeled off a 60-year-old man, and I wanted to share him as my example because as you age, a lot of these requirements actually go down, and men generally have lower requirements across the board for a lot of things than women. So he's a really good example that even with that um, background, his otherwise relatively healthy diet. I mean, most people would look at that and say 2 slices of high fiber toast with peanut butter and banana at breakfast, cheese Vegemite sandwich and apple at lunch, a bowl of pasta with some tomato-based sauce and veggies at dinner, and then dessert, some yogurt, strawberries, and mixed nuts. I mean, pretty whole foods based, pretty good looking right there. But you can see all these gaps in his micronutrients, especially a lot of B vitamins. So I made some changes for him. We went lower carb, and you can see that with these changes here, more spinach, some mushrooms and tomatoes on low carb bread with some eggs of a morning, some steak with some mixed veggies at dinner. So actually bringing some protein into this meal, and he kept his dessert. We started to tick off all of these micronutrients without changing anything else or supplementing. The only one we missed was magnesium by, it was at 99% or something, 94%. So pretty close. I wanted to highlight though that I changed the profile afterwards just to see what that would actually look like for a woman in her 40s. We're pretty much the same when it comes to these for women from 20s to about 40s. So just by changing our gender and our age, the same diet missed out on calcium and iron, which is pretty common in women. So they are the nutrients I wanted to flag. Amazingly, this diet was hitting off the folate requirements. So it can be done naturally. We just have to think about it. Because for women, the three that I usually see that we really need to focus in on is our iron, our folate, and our calcium. But in this diet, we were getting enough eggs, we were getting enough spinach, and some of the veggies that were thrown in was some asparagus. So we were able to top that one out. And I think this is the one I really want to talk about a little bit more because it's such a hot topic at the moment. And I love fasting, and I think it can be wonderful for some women. And I think for other women, it's probably not what we want to be doing. And there's a lot of debate out there at the moment that women shouldn't be fasting at all. And that's absolutely preposterous. We're all individuals. But fasting is a stressor. It's a wonderful hormetic stress if you're not otherwise stressed. But if you've got a big project on at work, if you've got something going on in family life, if you didn't sleep very well the night before, adding in fasting is not going to be doing our hormones any favors. And so longer fasts, more fasts are not necessarily the answer. Sometimes no fasting is a much better option depending on what you've got going on in your life at that moment. A nice one around fasting was a breakfast study I was involved in a few years ago. It was for people with type 2 diabetes, but we just changed one meal, breakfast, to either low carb or high carb, especially important for my insulin resistant ladies out there. Just by changing that one meal, we didn't do anything else later in the day. We saw that having that low carbohydrate breakfast set them up for stable blood glucose throughout the rest of the day, regardless, which means more stable hormones throughout the rest of the day, regardless. So, regardless of when you are breaking your fast, first thing in the morning or slightly later in the day, it's far more important with what we're breaking our fast with than time of day. This is just from Mindy Pels because everyone's talking about it at the moment, so I thought I'd absolutely have to bring it up. I love a lot of her fasting stuff. The diet stuff, not necessarily. I agree to a degree, but basically, she's got our cycles broken up into phases. So we start off from the first day of our bleed in what she calls the power phase. And basically, you saw on James's slide what the hormones were doing there. That better mimics, I guess, what a man's body would be doing. So this is where we function a little bit better if we are going to be doing any fasting. But if you're in your power phase and you're otherwise stressed, still don't fast. But if you're otherwise feeling good, you might throw in some big fasts in here if that's what you'd like to do. Be a bit kind to yourself when you know you're ovulating. If you've got an irregular period, that's going to be harder. Nothing really bad happens if you're not. You just might be a bit more irritable. But basically, we can power phase and fast if you're feeling otherwise good, right up until about day 20-ish or so of your cycle, depending on how long your cycle length is. But in that week or so leading up to your next period, and that luteal phase, you do not want to be doing any fasting. You really want to be kind to yourself. This is where, if you're going to have a higher carbohydrate intake, it would make more sense to do that. But it would also make just as much sense to have a higher energy intake, lots of healthy fats to support that. Which I thought I would share this today because this was my message this morning and I thought it was very funny and on topic as I was putting this together. So this is just to my husband. I'm asking him how his morning's going and I'm telling him I've got high anxiety for no reason. He thinks it's because I'm trying to buy him a birthday present. I wasn't. But basically, I'm like, I need a hug. I'm going to go get an omelette because I knew I needed some fat in my life. Normally, I would fast. I was not otherwise hungry, did not have any traditional hunger signals. But off I went to get my omelette, extra cheese and bacon, so extra fat. Thank you very much. I hadn't even finished the omelette before that feeling started to dissipate. My hunger actually kicked in. I was ravenous, and I also ate half my lunch, which was another lovely bit of avocado and cheese on some Mexican mince. So it just goes to show that some of those weird premenstrual things that we might be feeling, that heightened anxiety, sadness, anxiousness, irritability, it might be that shift in hormone, and those really lovely fats can put can put that fire out for us if we know what we're looking for. So I made that because I thought it was quite funny, and it's how I live my life. So if you don't already track, if you can track some things, that's going to be helpful for your data. So if you know when you're likely to ovulate or how far off you are your next period, you can work out if fasting's right for you, if you should have more carbs, if you need more fat. If you haven't slept very well, you can again decide, do you need a bit more fat or less fasting that day? And you can also track your food intake as well. So you can work out, like me, that anxiety hits instead of tummy grumbles, and you can work out what your individual take on it needs to be. So if you've taken anything away from that you'd like to, you can follow me on Instagram. And if you'd like a copy of that food sheet, the other QR code there will take you to that. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Kate. That was amazing. I really loved your real life example of what happened today in your conversation with Brian, your husband. And it is a really good example of, I think, how people's mood behavior stems from their cycle and where they happen to be in the cycle as well. That's great information. So we'll come back around to Kate for questions as well at the end with the Q&A. And I'm going to hand over to Catherine to do a screen share. And while she's sorting that out, I will introduce you, Catherine. She is our final presenter for this evening. It's our health coach, Catherine Main, and she works closely with our patients to bridge the gap between the knowing what to do and actually making those lasting lifestyle changes. She helps to build sustainable habits, particularly around nutrition, movement, sleep management, stress management, and mindset, which we think are really important pillars of health. And we've been really fortunate to work together over a number of years and have been able to see our patients achieve some really great long-term improvements in their health, which is great to see as a health professional in this space, because in my previous work, sort of predating more than 10 years ago, it would be really hard to see people make meaningful life changes. And I think health coaching has been part of that, bridging the gap between the knowing and the doing. So I'll hand over to Catherine to kind of go through and explain how that looks.
Great. Thank you, Deepa. Lovely to be here tonight. And thank you to James and Kate for all that wonderful information. So I'm going to come in from a little bit of a different point of view, but sort of going to touch on a few of similar topics. So now I just need to work out how to navigate. So what we're going to cover tonight is I'm going to talk a little bit about hormones as well, but just very, very briefly, and the role they play. How this shifts hormonally through our cycle and later in life. I am going to touch a little bit on peri and menopause just for the whole hormonal journey, and why our metabolic health matters, which a lot of you have talked about tonight, and a little bit about compliance to consistency and the pillars that wrap all that up together. So estrogen, we've already touched, James has already touched on this earlier tonight, but look, we do talk a lot about estrogen. She's like the star of the show. We know that through the previous slides that estrogen regulates our cycle. It does support our brain function, which is really, really great, along with those beautiful healthy fats that Kate were talking about, and also our bones and skin. Now, progesterone has also been mentioned. I love to call her the calming agent, or the calm queen. She does regulate our periods, like James said. So it's that before, before it sort of gets to where it needs to get. It keeps the estrogen on check, and it is one of the first things to decline in the perimenopause, which we'll get onto in a minute. Testosterone as well. We actually produce more testosterone than estrogen, and it really does provide that energy and drive. The boost of the energy supports the libido, which is obviously very important for preconception, and again, playing into our bone strength. Cortisol is the stress commander. Now, cortisol can get a bit of a bad rap, but cortisol is a good thing, but we want it to peak and to in the right time of the day. So again, going back to that stress management that we talked about previously, it's really important to get this under control. As we said, easier said than done, but we want that to peak in the morning and to obviously try and dissipate throughout the day, and especially in the evening. But cortisol does support our metabolism, so it's really important, and it does work in with the estrogen and the progesterone when we're got our hormones flowing along nicely. Now, insulin, it's a big one. Now, when it's working, it does regulate our blood sugar through that beautiful nutrition. We're going to get that beautiful, smooth insulin flow, but it does support our metabolism too, and it manages our fat storage. But when it's not working, when we are not maybe as insulin sensitive, or we lead or come into insulin resistance, this is where it does increase our hunger and our cravings. And that can play into that irregular cycles and ovulation issues. So it's really important to be talking and looking at I think, the nutrition from an insulin level, from an insulin nutrition level. So when, again, it's not in play, we are looking at that weight gain and the fat storage shifts. So what a little bit of a graph that I like to pop up is that blood sugar, we do get that roller coaster by eating those high carbohydrate foods. So we get the ups and the downs. To steady that out, we need the protein and the fats that Kate outlined for that beautiful steady energy all day. And especially when we need a hug. So also, and then this graph sort of says where that green line is, that really smooth line. And look, the graphics there put a pear and a carrot. Now that's not going to cut it for me. So I popped in some beautiful eggs, whole meats, and really good healthy fats. And that's what's going to give us that beautiful steady energy and really going to balance out those hormones. So remember, it is that dip that's going to drive that next round of cravings and fatigue. So, there is one system for every stage, and I want to talk a little bit more about how this stage goes wherever you are in the journey, whether it's periods and cycles, preconception, or pregnancy, postpartum, or even onto peri and to postmenopause. I think it's the one metabolic foundation. Now, there's nuances along that journey, of course, for when we are cycling within our menstrual cycle, maybe with pregnancy or in pregnancy. But again, the foundations are there, and I think they've been outlined really well so far tonight. So what about metabolic health care before conception? Well, again, it's going back to what all of us have mentioned tonight about the PCOS or PMOS. So, one of the leading causes of infertility. So again, it all is linked to that insulin resistance, and how we can correct that is through the nutrition that Kate outlined. Now, again, giving us that stable blood sugar, and it's just going to make everything so much better. So one of the research that I came across recently was that no matter where you are in your hormonal journey, it really is important to work alongside your metabolic health. So this research paper was women with pre-existing pre-diabetes or metabolic syndrome, which is a few symptoms that, if you have a couple of those, it equals metabolic syndrome. But even before peri, may experience more menopausal symptoms. So there's no better time, or it's not early enough that you can get into really good metabolic shape. So it really is that interplay between insulin resistance and those hormonal fluctuations that can exacerbate everything. So I want to touch on a little bit about perimenopause and the symptoms, because sometimes there is women that are trying to fall pregnant and they might be coming into that peri stage. Now, sometimes people can go through early menopause. So again, there's an absolutely long list of symptoms, and sometimes the dots are not connected. They might have some of these symptoms, but they don't actually realize that they're going through perimenopause. So, and what I just actually want to, a book that I just got off my bookshelf is this great read from Naomi Watts. And she was outlined in her book about she was trying to fall pregnant and she didn't realize she was actually in perimenopause. So she's got some great takeaways in here. It's a really fun read. It's sort of one of those ones, lots of doggies, and that you can pass around to your girlfriends. And it's, a really useful resource. So again, I love this slide because it really sort of just puts everything into perspective. I always call menopause puberty in reverse. So it is really that looking at everything where our hormones, go from zero to hero, and then the pregnancy, we obviously get that surge, and then they go back hopefully into that flow, and then they just, they drop off. So again, there is a really beautiful, I think it's beautiful, hormonal journey that we get to ride. Another little great slide I like to put up about the average ages around what's happening with our cycle. We've got that beautiful cycle that we could be in for many, many years, but it can get into, people are still trying to conceive potentially if they might be hitting early perimenopause. We get that roller coaster effect. And then obviously we can see there that the hormones just leave the group chat. So what actually helps us stick to the protocol that we're sort of talking about tonight, that beautiful metabolic function that we're all after? So I think it comes down to a strong sense of why. We really need to anchor our purpose and our values. And because motivation is, it fades. It's got finite energy. And so on that random Thursday, we really need to have that really good sense of why we want to follow this, to have good metabolic health. But on the other hand, we also need flexible structure. We need routines that might be able to have a little bit of a bend, but not necessarily break. So it's about finding that middle ground, that we can have a little bit of flexibility when no one's perfect, but we are just trying to, get that flow and that momentum. We need to have a plan for social situations and for family friction. We often get, within the family unit, we get a lot of welcome advice and maybe some unwelcome advice. And, again, if we're trying to navigate a new food environment, well, we get a lot of food pushes within the family unit. So again, we need a plan for all of that. And we need tools to be able to reset and start over. But we want to make sure that we're not having to start over each Monday and lapse for long periods of times. And I think that's where my work really sits. And also dropping that all or nothing mindset. So again, either we're all in or all out. And when we can step away from that and just have that, as I said, that flow and momentum, I think everything changes. So what about the lifestyle pillars that hold all this together? So I think these are not necessarily in order, but I think a lot of it starts with sleep. And I think it's very hard to make lasting and really considered change without good sleep. And I feel very passionate about that. I've actually got a free resource that I have published only about a couple of weeks ago. It's 11 pages on how hormones and sleep and what we can do about it. I've got my plan in there, exactly what I've done to achieve really good sleep in menopause. But also this could go for anybody who's really after that quality sleep, because with the sleep, that's when our brain and that deep sleep is really like the dishwasher going on every night. It's really cleaning out all the things that our brain and our hormones really need, that support structure. Blood sugar stability, we've talked a lot about that tonight. So again, what Kate's outlined, that beautiful protein and fats. Nervous system regulation. I know James talked about this, about really reducing that stress. Now, as he said, it's easier said than done, but I do believe, again, this is where a lot of the work needs to be done. When we can not have those triggers, if we've got that beautiful satiation of that beautiful food that we're eating, but we're also regulating our nervous system and how we react to our modern life and our family and our workplace, I think there's a lot to be said for that. Strength training, I think, is the best drug going. It's my drug of choice. I am now doing, very, very consistently 2 sessions a week and some bits at home. So this really is, when you build that muscle, it really is your glucose sink. So you're really building that beautiful insulin sensitivity, and it just does wonder for your mindset, your brain, your confidence, and I think everything, a lot changes around strength training. But I think my top pillar of health, and I know I've got it last, but as I said, these weren't in any order. My top pillar of health, I say, is connection. It's connection to ourselves. It's connection to our community, to our family, to what brings us joy. And I think we don't talk about this enough. And I think it's something that is really important, and it plays into all those other pillars. So again, I think, connection is where we need to start. So I think the key takeaways from me tonight is, yes, metabolic health underlines everything: our periods, our fertility, our pregnancy, and beyond, even into peri, as we saw. So there's the same pillars are going to apply to our whole hormonal journey, which is great to get this done. So you don't have to go to another protocol. Yes, nuances, but we can take this underlying of this metabolic health right through. Hormones do matter, but look, lifestyle absolutely matters as well. And there's so much we can do there. There's so much opportunity in our lifestyle to change. Yes, insulin drives every other hormone in the room. It's really important to keep that under control. And this is an exciting time, no matter where you are in your hormonal journey. I think it's a great opportunity to redefine what's next, whether that is conception, whether that is getting regular cycles, whether it is maybe feeling that perimenopause is maybe just coming around the corner and dropping inflammation to help you transition through that period. And of course, consistency beats perfection every time. Now, consistency, I think, is the headline number, the clickbait. But I think under there is where, again, I work with my clients very closely on getting them to consistency. And I break that down through systems and preparation, because I think consistency gets thrown around way too much. We really need to break that down of how we get to the consistency. And of course, I'm a big advocate of getting support. Find your tribe. Is that within your family unit, your social unit, or getting professional support? I think it's very, very hard to do this work alone. And yeah, and I think it's really important to get your cheer squad on the sides, including your medical, your doctor and your dietitians and all the things in your corner. So, where to start today? I think food absolutely matters. Cycles matter, but underneath those is our metabolism. It needs to be working. It needs to be, making sure our body really clicks. So it is about those small, steady choices, repeated over and over, and and the rest will fall into place. So I'd love to keep this conversation going. I love to hang out on Instagram. Come and say hi over there. Also, my email at Sydney Low Carb is there. And I'm open, always an open book and ready for any questions or anything that someone's got after the presentation.
Thank you, Catherine. That was awesome. A
Share.
lot of information I know has been shared tonight. Hopefully, we have some questions to come. I can't see anything in the chat at the moment, but I think, maybe we've answered some questions along the way. Feel free, please don't be shy. You can pop some questions through. But while we're sort of, waiting for people to think about, and process what they've heard, I thought I'd start with a couple of questions that come up commonly in the clinic that get asked, particularly I was going to ask you, James, about sperm health, because as you mentioned, it's been a bit of a hot topic of recent years, and the recognition around it has grown. So what can men actually do to improve their fertility, and how soon should they really start if a couple are thinking about conception?
So starting anytime, obviously, is better than no starting, of course. But it would be a minimum of around 2 to 3 months before you'd start conceiving, just because that's the sperm turnover. The things you talk about, like I suppose because men haven't had to be so reflective of their health for so long, for so many reasons, obviously, actually using it as a moment of reflection for all those habits that might creep in. And so diet, exercise, environmental exposure is a really big one. So, some people sit with their laptop, or maybe you're a cyclist, those things you think are healthy often have a big impact on sperm health just from a structural temperature perspective. The other one that comes up is that, men historically drink a bit more alcohol, and they might, vape on the weekends, do those little cheeky things. And I think that if your partner is going through so intense of an interrogation around her fertility, the minimum you can do is hold yourself to account. I find that often they're like, oh yeah, 1 or 2 won't matter. And you're like, well, look, at the end of the day, that's what your contribution is, being as diligent as you can for a short period of time. And so, yeah, I think it's all those lifestyle things that really matter, that everyone knows they should be doing, and really being as absolute as they can be.
Excellent. And do you think that there's any particular supplements that males should consider taking? I know there's quite a few brands out there that market to men. What do you think about the supplements and their quality, and what role does it have to play?
Yeah, we don't know. I think we're pretty general around specific micronutrients. I don't think we have a whole lot of data around that. But generally speaking, of decent, good quality, broad spectrum multivitamin should be your mainstay. There's a few strongly marketed ones, but I think you can find something similar in other good quality men's health vitamins. You don't have to overthink it too much.
Excellent. And I know, Kate, you mentioned eat more, not less. How, do you think that's something easy for people to achieve straight off the bat? Or, how, especially when you're seeing someone for the first time, how do you kind of go through that process?
Yeah, no. So I guess for some people it's the green light to actually go ahead and do the thing that they've desperately wanted to do it, but we're being told, I guess, societally, we need to eat less and be thin. And, as women, we don't need as much food, which is, of course, ridiculous. If someone's been doing that for a very long time, though, because I'll see people that maybe have had this pattern for 20, 30 years, trying to break that is really confronting and can be really daunting. So we just do really small little steps. And I might set a goal of 30 grams of protein per meal and 20 grams of fat. And we're just going to see how close to that we can get at each meal. And it's more about consistently making sure that we're aiming towards it rather than actually hitting the target, and building up slowly over time.
Excellent. I think one other common thing we get asked about a lot in the clinic is iron deficiency, and we sometimes pick it up a lot as well in women who are trying to fall pregnant or who have been pregnant and they're kind of approaching perimenopause. How can we, like, what do you think are some of the problems with that? And that's actually a question for all panelists. But we might start with Kate and then we can come around to others. But yeah, with iron deficiency, what do you tend to kind of do about that for women?
Yeah, so I guess it can depend on what the underlying cause is. Is it because we've got some really heavy bleeding going on? So no matter what you put in during the month, we're losing way too much during that period time frame. So can we do something about just regulating the overall cycle to reduce that with the general metabolic approach? We might need to increase the amount of times we're having red meat. Sometimes it's as simple as, that nutrient density side of it and bringing in some more red meats, some more oysters, those sorts of things that are going to cover off a lot of those lovely micronutrients. And sometimes it's actually looking at underlying gut health. Maybe there's some kind of absorption issue going on. So the food's coming in, but for whatever reason, we can't access it. So yeah, it depends on what else is going on holistically. But they're the sort of things that I would be looking for.
Hmm. Um, Catherine, do you have any like experience with women who you've seen who are struggling with their iron?
No, not really. No,
Mm,
it's mostly I think the one that I have a lot of experience with that Kate was talking about is under eating. If I
mm,
have a conversation every single week with clients under eating.
mm. And James, anything to add around iron?
I think the point made, like it's very narrow to me, but I think obviously we think of perimenopause as a decline in hormones, but there's actually quite a, as the graph that Catherine showed, there's quite a lot of intensification of periods. So often people think, oh, I'm over 40 heavy periods, I can't really take anything, but there's a lot of good treatment to at least minimize the amount of blood loss, which will, improve those iron stores.
Mm. Irina's got a question. She's asking, what about women with endometriosis? Is there evidence for low carb to help with that? She's especially interested for HRT in women who are entering perimenopause with endometriosis present before that. So I guess maybe James, did you want to talk to that?
I would defer to my dietetics colleague, but I'm not sure if there's any formal evidence around it. I think, if anything, we talked about that inflammatory process that's come up in a few of the talks tonight, and I think low carb would make a lot of sense as we're entering a more inflammatory phase of reproductive health, and particularly if you've got endometriosis, we're starting to believe a systemic illness and there's a lot of systemic inflammation that comes with it. So I would think that there's an absolutely plausible rationale for low carb helping with it, particularly when you side endometriosis with the more chaotic hormones at perimenopause. So it makes a lot of sense, but I'm not aware of any formal data.
Okay.
Yeah, I tend to agree, actually. All of those pathways are there. Going back to first principles, it makes a lot of sense given that inflammatory nature that we are beginning to acknowledge. But as far as I'm aware, that doesn't mean anything. So I haven't come across it recently. I don't know if you have, though, deeper.
Yeah, data is pretty scarce, unfortunately, with endometriosis and dietary interventions. And a lot of the data is done on small population groups. But I can speak to my clinical experience and the people I've worked with over the years at our clinic, and also from my own personal experience of stage 4 endometriosis. So I think that certainly in the patients where we've targeted inflammation, and that's where low carb works brilliantly, is to reverse inflammatory processes. And I often now, like, my whole understanding of endometriosis has changed over the years, and I almost feel like it behaves like something that's escaped our immune surveillance. So, this is the growth of uterine tissue in spots it really should not be. And part of it, also, there's hypotheses that endometriosis is a defensive process by the female body as well. And this is some really interesting research that has come out of Italy in that space. So I think it makes a lot of sense to try to regulate, normalize metabolic health, and that can be a very powerful reversal process for endometriosis or an adjunctive treatment alongside other standard treatments for endometriosis. And I don't think that, there's very little to lose when you change your food approach. So that would be my take on it. Catherine, I wanted I mean, you might be interested in kind of chiming in around the HRT for women who are entering perimenopause. You do a lot of work with women who are in the perimenopause and menopause space, and I guess a lot has changed, with the information that's available to women in the last 5 years, particularly last 2 years even. But
Yes.
what are your thoughts around that? How can people deal with the overwhelm? There's so much information out there.
It's a lot. There's a lot of meno washing. There's a lot of supplement. It's a money-making machine out there. I think my advice is to, and I've even had to do this myself, is to just cut the voices down. I've had to shut down some voices, shut down, lean into a couple of people that I trust, and I think they've got good information. I don't have to agree with all of it. I don't agree with all of it, but I think it's about knowing where you're at and just. I explain it like a menu. So you can't have everything off the menu at once, but you can take a few things off and give them a go. But there is so much out there, and it's getting, and sure, I'm one of those voices too, but I try and keep it real. But it is about finding what's going to work for you at your time, your schedule, your lifestyle, because not everybody's the same.
Yeah, and James, I think, I mean, you have a lot of experience in the space of prescribing HRT, evaluating women who might be considering HRT. Um, I guess, how do you go about, deciding, what are some of the key bits of information women need to kind of know and share with their healthcare provider when they're looking into HRT?
I think it's first of all, you have to sort of create the space where someone wants to share. That's the first thing.
Mm.
And so, there's always this risk that someone feels a bit silly for thinking that, they sat on a chair wrong and now their hip's really sore and going, is that menopause? And, it might be, who knows? I'm open-minded. I learn something every day. So as a practitioner, you want to make sure that there's space for people just to be open about what they think may be contributing it. On the other side of the desk, when you're listening, the really important thing I find is timeline and pattern helps a lot. So, you take the timeline of periods and you say, well, is this fluctuating with your periods, or is this sort of disappeared or created whilst the periods have stopped? And that really starts to create a bit of a pattern of the things that you can kind of attribute to different hormonal milestones, if that makes sense. And then once you kind of listen and put it into a bit of a narrative, then it's a much easier story to tell the lady who's in front of you. And I often draw that same hormonal graph and be like, well, you felt this way here, so that makes sense that you felt the way here. And you talk about like postnatal and all sorts of different episodes, and then it creates this understanding of what can be attributed to what forces. And I find that in the big mix of sort of hormonal discussion, it gives you a much more structured approach to adding, subtracting, moving different things around. That's how I do it, at least.
And is it ever like is there an age limit at which, you can begin HRT or you can end HRT? Like, where are we at with that nowadays?
It's softer than it used to be, but there's still
Yeah.
some caveats around it. So there's the old-fashioned idea of within 10 years of the last period and under 60, mostly for concerns around evolved heart health, like evolving heart disease. We've more recently, about 12 months ago, I think there's now some flexibility with transdermal up to about 65 to 66 for commencement. All of this requires logic, really. Like if someone has their last period at, for 57 and they're coming to you at 61, that makes no sense that that's any more dangerous than someone who had their last period at 50 and comes to you at 59 and 11 months. So I think that people are more equipped to put someone's case into a context. And if it sniffs right and it makes sense and you talk about the risks and everyone's otherwise well, I'm pretty open-minded. And I often give people a trial and say, look, I can tell you all the risks, but I can't tell you the benefits. Let's give it a trial and then reflect.
Mm. And I guess, to come back to Irina's question, she was sort of referencing the individual who's got pre-existing endometriosis. Is that a contraindication or it's okay with HRT?
Totally fine to take HRT with a history of endometriosis. It might be slightly less conventional in some cases, depending on its severity, but in most cases, it's not much of a concern at all.
It's good to know. Christy was asking, what would you suggest for an older teenager who has very painful periods? Over-the-counter period pain medication does take the edge off, but where would you suggest they start? I guess maybe James, do you want to
Sure.
chime in on that?
No worries. I think it's important that we recognize that this needs treatment. Obviously, you say that, if people put up with it. So the first thing is to meet with someone medical that you trust and sort of explain this, especially if you're a teenager and this might be your first time talking about reproductive health. Picking the right person to have that conversation with is really important. You don't want to introduce a negative experience early on in someone's life. Beyond that, then there's a discussion really exploring the patterns, the priorities, all the different risks and the risk factors and the family history, just to come up with a plan. We find that, if we're talking about holistic stuff, there's often, both mental and behavioral and dietary, interventions that can be done, obviously, but oftentimes the symptoms are so severe that it warrants more management than that. Generally speaking, with heavy periods and depending on the investigations available to us, we often do go down the hormonal pathway, which can often seem very, I don't know, superficial. But if someone explains it to you properly and sort of explains the rationale and follows up, then usually our cornerstone is really regulating the cycle as best we can.
Mm. And Kate, what kind of dietary interventions might you put into place for someone with painful periods? If,
Yeah, so I think as a teenager that suffered this myself, I can definitely say I don't think that my vegetarian high carbohydrate diet was doing me any favors from an inflammatory point of view, which is something we often see in, in a lot of young women anyway, typically avoiding too much of the meat and, having a preference for carbs. Generally speaking, I don't know, not everybody's in that pathway, but I think even if we can just get more into that anti-inflammatory sort of principles, making sure that we've got those micronutrients there so that we know that that's not playing a role, and making sure that we've got steady blood glucose so that we know that that's not then playing a role, and getting all those pillars in place, I guess, so that we can rule that out. Maybe that's all it is. Maybe there is further intervention, but that's sort of where I would look to for diet.
And I think, Kirsty, I think the most important thing you've done, or, is to recognize that painful periods is not normal. Unfortunately, there's still this myth that abounds that it's totally okay to have periods that are uncomfortable, that require you to take pain relief every month. That really is a red flag. And it's what I wish is taught in all PE classes very early on in high school, is that it's not normal. So young people can seek help quite early. So on sort of that note around the period itself, I wanted to ask Kate about the Mindy Pell's sort of structure there with the cycle, and perhaps eating with your cycle. Do you think that's something that, is really good foundational information to share with younger women? Just sort of having a bit more of an understanding of how they can manage their cycle better?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the younger women today are in such a great position because we're all talking about periods. There's apps to track it. Like none of that existed when I was younger. I wouldn't have known any of this stuff. So now you've got everything at your fingertips to do that. So you can know exactly where you are at all times should you decide to track it like that within reason. Obviously, we've got irregular periods and things to take into account. But once you understand yourself and then how you react personally to your hormone fluctuations, you can really then tailor what you do to help manage that across your whole lifespan. So, when things do come up, heavier exercise recovery time because of where something's fallen, you can absolutely do anything at any time, but you just might need to recover or fuel differently. And I think her basis gives just that really nice shift of, yeah, when you're feeling good, you can do all these things, but if you're otherwise stressed, pull it back and sort of have that as your basis to go forward. And I think that will just stabilize metabolism across the lifespan, which would be amazing.
Mm. And Catherine, what do people do about stress?
Did that
What are
answer the
like
question?
some yeah, sorry, I think our internet has been a bit choppy there because I know that you were chatting and then it sort of dropped out a little, but I think most of us caught what Kate was talking about. Catherine, I wanted to come to you about stress because we brought it up a few times, and I strongly feel that with so many of the people I work with, things really fall into place when they're managing stress better because I can do a lot of recommending of medical changes and nutrition lifestyle changes, but I just find the people that do the best manage their stress. So what kind of areas do you suggest someone does when they're first coming to, I guess, yeah, for particularly females, managing their hormones and what's going on in their, the changes that they might be going through?
Yeah, it's a massive one because we can be doing eating all the right foods, but then if we have this high stress reactive lifestyle, then we are going to have that blood sugar rise. So we can a lot can blood sugar can rise from many things besides food. So it is about recognizing the triggers, breaking down what those triggers are. I mean, they're your really good messengers. They hold a lot of information. Seeing, I talk a lot about boundaries and putting boundaries in place and seeing, no, I think boundaries need gates and sometimes they're open and sometimes they're closed. They need to be a little bit flexible. But yeah, it's boundary work. Is your sleep, again, I go back to sleep. Are we waking up at 3 a.m.? I had my own experience a couple of weeks ago. I just had one of these days and juggling all the things. And I was, my wind down routine was all the same and everything was fine, but it was at 3:11 and I was up and whoa, it was like a bolt. So again, I track that back to what happened during the day. So again, no day is going to be perfect. We're not after this magical utopia lifestyle that we think that we should have, but there's a lot we can do when we don't, I always ask a client, is that yours to carry? Is that yours to take on? Is there a different way that you could react to that or process that or delegate or get some help or, and look, some people have very complex lifestyles and family situations, and I really appreciate that. But what is there, that messy in the middle stuff? What is there? What are the the bits that we can work out and that we can maybe take away? But again, there's a lot about deep breathing, there's walking, there's a lot of free stuff. I love Insight Timer, the app. There's lots of free things there about some really great meditations. So there's quite a lot that we can put in someone's toolbox, and sometimes it's not about adding stuff in, it's about taking stuff out. So we have to look at it at both ways, but it's meeting that person where they're at and finding out what they can do one little thing at a time.
What's your personal go-to for stress management? And I'm going to come to Kate and James on that too.
Well, my favorite is my early morning walk. I think, that is just it's free, it's easy, it works for me. 10 years ago, I couldn't have done it because I've been running kids around to sport at 6 a.m. But now in my stage of my life, this is what works for me, and it's I love it. I sleep well, so I can get up easy. I'm done by 7. It's unplugged time. I'm walking in local nature in a corridor that I've got, very close to the city, and yeah, I think any time of the day, a good walk and sunshine.
Fantastic. Kate?
Beautiful. I think I have so many, but I really liked Catherine's. I think that's a big one that I'm definitely working on more is what is mine and what is mine to put down. So what do I need to carry and what can I just step away from? I found that's been instrumental in actually just having less to manage. But outside of that, exercise and baths and lighting a nice candle or some incense there because I'm very sensory. So all those things for me help a lot the ambience of where I'm at.
James?
Pretty simple. I just go surfing. Works wonders.
Yes, good one.
Pretty good. Like that one. If anyone wants to share what your de-stress tool is, it might be nice. Others might grab some inspiration. Feel free to pop it into the box. Look, we're coming close to the end of tonight, so if anyone wants to raise their hand and ask a question, you're welcome to, or we can pop it in the chat. I had one more question that also comes up a fair bit. And that's more about like what coaching looks like, particularly Catherine, like what do you see the role of a health coach is in medicine, I suppose, like it's a very medical world, but what do you feel would be the role of health coaching there?
It's about holding the space for someone to talk and navigate their challenges. Um, I think, we're the first ones as parents to get our kids coaching, or we were to get assistance for anyone else, but then to take it on ourselves, it's quite different. But it's also navigating those obstacles that are holding people back. And sometimes I think a lot of those obstacles we get in our own way, and it's just breaking those down and going back to, and I think Kate mentioned it about the food conditioning that we've had since for a very long time, and trying to create those new tracks, those new lifestyle tracks that we need to put down. And it's navigating all of that. And so when we do that mindset work and breaking down those barriers, and then with that nutritional protocol wrapped around it, we can see a lot of change.
Excellent. And another question, completely different tact around collagen, which we've had from a number of patients, is, and you touched upon it, Kate, in your presentation. Is it okay if people supplement with any kind of collagen? Does it matter whether they use flavored or unflavored? And is there a particular form that you prefer?
Yeah, totally. At the end of the day, it probably depends a little bit on your health goal and where you're at. So if extra flavorings and things like that aren't something you're particularly worried about, then go for it. They taste wonderful. If you're a bit more down that clean pathway, then something like a pure grass-fed collagen would probably make my preference. But anywhere in there is probably going to be okay. The things you definitely do not need in your collagen is all the extra fiber and vitamins and random stuff that, you can get that from food, or you could do a targeted supplement should you need it. You don't need it in your collagen. Most of those are like double or triple the price, and then you can't actually take them in a large enough dose to get the collagen I'd like you to have anyway, because they're outdone by the B6 or whatever they've put in there that I then have to limit. So the cleaner the product and the more straightforward, probably the better. But whatever is going to taste good and also fit you is also a really good answer.
Mm. And there is another question about fertility tracking. So the ovulation tracking, James, that you mentioned in your presentation. So when with the ovulation test kits, when are you meant to start using them? Are you meant to do it daily, second daily? And lastly, there is a question about semen analysis. How soon should it be done after, you've started trying to have a baby and been
Sure.
unsuccessful with that? Sorry, it's a triple
No, we can do it. No worries.
question.
So semen analysis should probably be done within that 12 months, like those same rules. So if you're under 35, good 12 months of trying, that's when we would recommend, unless of course there's other medical problems. And then after 6 months of trying, if you're over 35 or over 40, of course. From the ovulation test kits, each one's a bit different, so there's instructions that come with each one. But generally speaking, for someone with a 28-day cycle, you'd start at around day 9 or 10, and you can be pretty economical by doing it daily, because it does test positive across 2 days, and you don't have to be that accurate. But realistically, you'd start at day 10, maybe do another one at day 12, and if you're really finicky, you can do sort of 13, 14, and that should be more than enough for that cycle.
Mm. Excellent. All right. I think we might do like one last home takeaway tip from tonight, that from our panel, and we'll call it a day. So we might start with Catherine. If you've got sort of like one take-home tip for women who might have any period issues, hormone issues, where would you start?
Um, I would start, I would ask them what is their most dominant thought. And that's where I would start. So what is that? What's on the top of your list? What is that one that keeps coming back, coming back, coming back? Where do you feel that you feel is, the top of the list? And I would start there. Um, I can't stress enough sunlight, eating with the circadian rhythm, and walking and strength training.
Mm.
You feel amazing after those things and obviously sleep. So there's a lot there. But if there was one thing, I would just start with what you feel you could manage next.
You had the
Um,
best quote, strength training is the best drug, I think you said, or
oh
strength
yeah,
training
my
is
drug of choice. Yeah,
advice. Yeah.
the stress drug.
I completely 100% agree. I think it's a, phenomenally powerful medication, something that you can do every day that really, moves the dial
Yeah.
fundamentally. So it's a very important one. And also on the note of sleep, if anyone does want to access Catherine's
Mhm.
sleep resource, please contact the clinic or you can contact Catherine directly. But yeah, happy to
Oh,
facilitate that. And Kate, so one sort of takeaway message, or where should someone start? Maybe, when they're
Yeah.
grappling with
Mine's diet
morning.
related because dietitian.
yeah.
So
Yep.
I think just more in line with those low carb, real food principles. So more protein, more fat, less carbs. That's going to automatically promote a less inflammatory space. From there, we can get really nuanced if you want to get into it. But just making some little changes around that so it's more in line with that would be a wonderful first little step in that direction.
Fantastic. And James, we'll end with your take home.
Best take home message is you'll probably be fine. If you do all the right things, you don't need to stress now as you'll probably get pregnant.
Yeah, I love that one. It's the classic story of you doing all the things and then relaxed for a month or two, went on an amazing holiday, and all of a sudden it just happens. So you're right. Sometimes we do all the, lots of investigating and it happens at the end of the day. It's a really good positive note to end on, I think. Thank you to all the presenters tonight for giving up your time to share some information with us. Also, thank you to everyone who attended tonight. Really appreciate you giving up some of your evening as well. Rhiannon, I saw that you wanted the sleep guide. Yep, we'll definitely send that through to you. And if anyone wants to, learn more, get some further information or simply find out more, please just contact us at the clinic and we can help you out. And I think we often run these information evenings once a quarter. So we're hoping to do another one in September, which we'll share our date soon. It's going to be actually on fasting, which is, a really topical area. All the different types of fasting, what works and at certain time periods of life, and what works the best as well in women and in men. And we'll go through some of that at our next information evening. And we're going to have a special patient presenter along as well, sharing their story and their journey with fasting and how it's helped. So enjoy the rest of your evening and we'll see you at the next one. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.